the powers that be who control society and all of the entertainment make no attempt, make no effort to hide or put a veil on their operations. Whether it is through predictive programming, using certain occult symbols, writing documents, white papers, or other means, they admit what they're going to do, what they've done, or what they're in the process of doing. Think about Hollywood, for instance. Where does the term Hollywood come from? Most of us are familiar with Hollywood, especially if you live in the West. But not many of us know where that term originated. The name Hollywood comes from the ancient Druids. The Druids worshipped the trees. They were tree worshippers. And holly was their most sacred symbol. That's because it was sacred to Mother Holly, or Norse, who was the goddess of the underworld. That's where satanic and occultism interacts with phraseology. They would use that holly to cast spells. Hollywood is casting a spell on your mind. Not a literal spell, but more like psychological warfare. Not my words, there is a document from the CIA in 1947 that is titled "The Motion Picture as a Weapon of Psychological Warfare." Public information. But phraseology, speaking of phraseology like Hollywood, what's the full name of TV? Tell-A-Vision. On your Tell-A-Vision, you turn into a channel. And that channel has a program. See, when you actually use these phrases, when you actually break them down, they mean something different. But since, from a young age, most of us were exposed to television, we have just accepted it and filtered it out. The way our brains work as primarily wanting to survive, if you hear a rap song that talks about murdering somebody, raping their dead body, and doing drugs, you've grown up with that in most cases, especially if you were born in the 90s like myself. Tupac, Snoop Dogg, all of those. And because you grew up around that, you're used to hearing that music, you automatically filter it out because it is no threat to your survival. One last point. If you look into James Bond, the writer of James Bond, Ian Fleming, was in MI6. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with MI6, that is the British version, the UK version of the CIA. And Ian Fleming was really close friends with Alan Dulles. For those of you unfamiliar with the Dulles brothers, they are very forgotten these days. But back in their day, they were infamous. The Dulles brothers were the brothers who started the CIA, served as the director of the CIA. And during the 1950s, that's when the CIA began basically a schematic system where they would have a corporation, let's say United Fruit. It would be controlled by stockholders, their law companies Sullivan and Cromwell, and the CIA. Basically, what would happen is Iran would want control over those resources instead of the U.S. company. And because of that, the Dulles brothers would have propaganda, pamphlets, videos, all these resources to cause disenfranchisement, dissatisfaction with the government, just like the U.S. did with Iraq. Same playbook, they do this all the time. eventually you would overthrow that leader if you had enough support and an uprising, just like they did in Iran. And you would implement a puppet who would then let the corporations like United Fruit or Halliburton in Iraq control those resources and give the profits back to the stockholders. But speaking of psychological operations, speaking of propaganda, the Dulles brothers were very important pertaining to that. So ask yourself, is it just coincidence that Hollywood comes from the Druids, casting spells for the underworld? Your television goes into a program and a channel. None of that is coincidence. All of the things around us are planned.